Kia ora koutou. Welcome to this live right Q&A. How you doing out there? My name's Daniel Androutsos. I'm a plain language consultant trainer. Some of you may have seen me before. I'm very pleased to be our host today. And with us, we have a couple of right A-listers, I'd say, to discuss what can make things a little bit tricky when we're trying to deal with some very hard messages. Maybe hard because it's bad news, maybe because we're just not quite sure how to deliver it. So we've got Corinna with us, literally a living legend at Right from our content team, and Jacob, I'm honoured to also have as my training manager, a legend in progress. Welcome, both of you. I'd love you to introduce yourselves slightly. Why are you here, Corinna?
Oh, I'm here because over my decades of working with language, I've moved from being fascinated by words to being fascinated by the way words affect people and their lives.
Excellent. Yes, it's always creating some kind of impact in the world. Everything we say, do, or write, if it's read. And Jacob?
Kia ora. Sorry, Denny, what's your question? Why am I here?
Yes.
I'm here because I'm a trainer at Right. More existentially, why am I at Right? I want to be wherever I can be to help people communicate as clearly as possible with whatever they're talking about.
Thank you. You must certainly do that on a daily basis. So remember, this is a live Q&A, so you can use the Q&A function on Zoom. If you'd like to ask a question, we won't be monitoring the chat. So if you want to get to the Q&A, just click on More. There's a Q&A button there. You can put your questions in. And something else I'd like to let you know about is that just by being here today, you are helping something good happen in the world. We've recently joined a movement called B1G1, which means pretty much every interaction anyone has with Right leads to some positive change. So today, everyone is coming along as helping to fight fires in Indonesia. And basically, each of you are protecting about 1 square meter of rainforest. So it's pretty neat. So please, your questions rain in. We'll get through as many as we can. To start with, I'd like to get maybe your top tip from each of you, Corinna and Jacob. What's your top tip to somebody who is, at this point, struggling with communicating a difficult message? Corinna?
Me? I think there's 3 parts to this answer. The key words for me would be clarity, connection, and empathy. So the first thing is to get really clear on what you want to achieve, what you need to achieve, and then from that, figure out how you can connect with the person or people, and then adding a bit of empathy to try and think about how they will feel when they receive the message.
So just a question about the empathy. Does it mean you have to like them more?
No, that's maybe more like sympathy. Empathy is consciously trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and think about how their world looks and how what you have to say will affect their world.
Excellent. So I don't have to be a big fan.
To be respectful, though.
Jacob, your top tip?
I think my tip comes off the back of Corinna's top tip. So all of my thoughts, I think, are going to keep looping back to just don't make the situation worse by thinking about yourself too much. Like if you are trying to deliver bad news, that's an uncomfortable conversation, potentially uncomfortable, potentially just difficult message to send, but just don't make it worse by putting it off and delaying what you need to say.
Yes. Nothing much worse than bad news, except bad news and more frustration.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right, let's start with a crunchy one. And this might be something quite a few of our listeners could be facing sometime in the future if they haven't already. How do we communicate top-down bad news, like structural budget cuts, without completely destroying team morale? It's a toughie. All right, Jacob, going to you first. What do you got?
That is a tough one. I think to a degree, it would depend hugely on the team you're in and where you are. I think that being realistic, there is going to be a hit to morale. With a situation like this is a really good example. If you've got a message that you need to send, if you're going the route of kind of having a company-wide announcement or something like that, that immediately puts people on edge, and there's just going to be really high anxiety up until the moment that you give the news that you need to give. So, gosh, I imagine there's 100 things that you can do to try and make a situation like this better. The main things I think would be, don't wait to say what you need to say. Really clearly break down what are the things that you know, what are the unknowns that you're heading into. Don't relish in something like that. I don't think anyone really would, but I think that the discomfort and the empathy is going to come through, but don't make it about yourself and how uncomfortable you are in giving news like that.
It's a really good point about this company-wide communications. Well, sometimes we need to get a message out to everyone, but yeah, maybe there's something in that. If you know people are going to be personally affected, then try to maybe make the tilt to personal communications as soon as you can, so that actually to what's coming. Corinna, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the worst thing is to keep people waiting so that they start muttering, talking among themselves, speculating. I think honesty with a bit of diplomacy is the best thing, but I would say it also depends on the size of the company and the culture of the company. If you have quite a secretive top-down structure, you would approach it differently to a small company that's more like a family. But yeah, I would say don't keep people waiting, but do your best to let them down gently and honestly.
Yeah, it's an interesting point about the diplomacy as well. If you get it wrong, it can sound like it's just paying lip service. If you get it right, then you can actually create some sense of showing respect. This actually might relate quite closely to that. This is a question from Michelle. I'll flick this back to you, Corinna. What strategies do you use, or would you use hypothetically, for people that get emotional in difficult conversations?
Do you know, I spent yesterday reading a book called Crucial Conversations that had a lot about this. And what it said was that problems tend to arise when people don't feel safe. So maybe their self-worth is threatened, their safety feels threatened, they feel there's a power imbalance. And so they said the focus is on making things safe. And there will be different ways that you do that. Some of it will be about what the book called contrasting, where you say, I don't want to do this, I do want to do that. So you might say something like, I really don't want to upset you, but I do have to break some news to you that might be difficult. So that you're trying to take the personal out of it without taking the empathy out of it. You cannot dictate how somebody takes bad news, and emotions are part of life. But you can try and do it carefully and tactfully.
Right. And if we at least clarify the intent a little bit, how it lands. Jacob, anything to add?
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I think it's brilliant because I think for a lot of people, when you're in an uncomfortable situation or you're delivering news that might give someone an emotional reaction, I think that framing it and not trying to make it something that it's not. If you need to have a hard conversation, it's going to be a hard conversation. And I think where people want it to be easy is they don't want to have to feel that discomfort. But probably the most effective way to deal with that is to just say from the start, hey, this is going to be an uncomfortable conversation, but this is what we're talking about, and go from there. If you put someone in a situation where you set them up to think that it's going to be a nice, fun conversation, and then it finds that this is a really serious performance review and what someone's been doing isn't up to scratch, or the more blindsided someone feels, the more defensive they're going to be. And if they're defensive, if they're emotional, they're not thinking logically, they're not actually engaging in the conversation. So I think framing it is really important.
Yeah, that's great. Liz also had a question about tips for writing empathetically without tipping into lip service or sentimentality. I think we've kind of captured some of that now too, which is great. Let's flip it over. So let's imagine that rather than the message coming down, maybe we're sending one up. So we're sending perhaps a message or an email to senior leadership because the project or program is not working out, it's failing. Any tips on framing that right? When we're writing to authority, should we be writing more formality to show that respect or something? Corinna, what do you think?
I think that the first thing I would do would be to think really carefully about whether email is the best place to start. Because typically, in my experience, and maybe yours, email can be a very blunt instrument for conveying difficult news. So again, this depends on the size of the organization, how hierarchical it is. There are cultural things as well. People from other countries bring different expectations. But I would probably start off by broaching the topic with somebody in person and talking to them about the best approach. I think, again, being clear about what you need to say and then thinking about the connection and the empathy. It's a different situation, but you need the same tools. You're still thinking about how they're going to receive the message and how you can do a good job, and being really clear about what you need to achieve.
That's great. Jacob, on top of that, yeah.
So giving the news about a project to people up.
Yeah.
If it's bad news that just sits by itself because of a problem that needs to be solved, it's not going to be useful for someone if you just go, hey, here's a problem, I'm going to put this on your plate. Giving a rough breakdown of what has been done, what is the significance of the problem, what are the things that we could possibly try, any information in that realm is going to be really useful for your leaders to do something about that problem. If we look at it, I think going back to what you were saying, Corinna, if you're in a situation where maybe email isn't the best format, giving some information about turning the email into an invitation to talk in person, because the advantage of talking in person is that you have so much more subtext and cues from being in a room with someone that you can't get in writing. But framing that conversation and I guess the agenda of, so this is the project, these are the things that's not going right, here are the things that we want to talk about, let's have a meeting. That's going to set someone up so that they can go into that conversation as prepared as possible, rather than giving them all of that context for the first time in that one-on-one.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, and we also had a question that came through from our anonymous viewer about communicating before a meeting, with trying to manage expectations beforehand, sending somebody through, or perhaps speaking to them in person. And I think we've recognized here that personal contact makes a huge difference. I was running a peer review workshop the other week, and in peers, they actually got a chance to ask each other how they like to receive feedback before they gave each other feedback, so they could actually get intel about the best way to deliver those messages. And that's really the key here, isn't it? If we're delivering a bad message and we can get a bit of intel about how they're going to want to receive that, then that can help us too. Lovely. Okay, here's a tricky one. Replying to a complex complaint, and I need a few days to put the facts together. Should I respond immediately, or should I wait until I have all the facts?
I don't think it's difficult at all. I think you acknowledge the complaint briefly and courteously and say you'll respond more fully when you've gathered some information, but say in what time frame you're going to respond and make sure that you do.
Yep.
Oh.
You can do the same thing as well in an in-person conversation. Being a receiver of the bad news, I don't think people realize that you're equally, in some situations, you're in control of the conversation. So if you're on the receiving end of a one-on-one, being honest that you might need a minute to think through your response and I guess process of information. Yeah.
Right. There's another nice question that came through related a little bit to what we were talking about before. Corinna, you mentioned empathy and sympathy. And the question is here, how do we stick more with empathy rather than sympathy when we're giving bad news? Any tips to say in that ballpark?
Yeah, I think the clarity thing, being really clear about what you want to achieve by the end of the discussion. If you do have bad news to break or a difficult message to put across, if you go into the conversation or the email, whatever it is, with a really clear outcome in mind, then sympathy becomes something that gets in the way, because it means that you're letting emotions run it, which means you're less likely to get to the outcome you need to get to. So empathy, which says, I know that if I was in your shoes, I would want this, and rather than that. However, this is where we're at and it's awful. The other thing is to use I statements more than you statements. And this comes up too if you've ever done couples therapy or something. You don't say to your partner, you never take the rubbish out. You say things like, I feel like the rubbish has become something that I usually end up doing. I statements people can't argue with because that's your point of view. The minute you start using you statements, people can feel that you're putting words into their mouth, and that can make them feel less safe. So yes, sympathy is great, but I would save that more for personal communication than workplace, which I assume is what we're talking about here.
That's great. Thank you, Corinna. Any other thoughts, Jacob, about the definition between sympathy and empathy and playing? empathy more?
Yeah, I think just to add to the clarity of the message and really considering what is the experience going to be like for the receiver of this news is thinking in advance. So they've got this bad news and they're probably going to have a bunch of follow-up questions. They're probably going to want to know either why something is happening or how you've come to a decision and things like that. If you come to those conversations prepared with those answers, it shows that you've actually thought about what this person is going to be thinking and how they're going to feel when they receive this news. If you're not prepared going into those hard conversations, it doesn't demonstrate that you've thought about their experience or how they would react at all, which is possibly going to make the situation a lot worse and erode trust.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. That's great. Let's talk slightly into some other challenges we might be facing here with communicating with the audience. Really nice one in the chat about adapting a communication or approach for a neurodiverse audience. He said, how would you adapt your approach, if at all?
That's a very broad question because are we talking about trying to accommodate a vast range of the spectrum of problems people might have, or can we take it back to looking at accessibility and say things like, okay, I am writing to a group that includes somebody with low vision. I'm writing to somebody who has said they have a learning difference. I am writing to somebody who's only got one hand. You are, again, trying to put yourself in the reader's shoes. And so one of the high-level things that Wright is always saying is the reader or the listener is the most important person, and that you might have to do more work at your end so that they have less work to do at their end. And that might include accessibility. It might include asking people how you can make things easier for them, because again, you don't necessarily know what their needs are.
I see. It's a big chunky question. Jacob?
Yeah, a lot of the basic plain language principles also translate to when you're speaking with someone face to face, but all of those principles lend themselves for communicating with people who might be diverse. So not delaying, getting to your main message, making your main points clear, making it really clear the potential answers to your readers' questions. If you're not using simple, straightforward language, that's going to make the message more confusing for any person. So if you're doing all of the general plain language stuff, then there's a good chance that that will help regardless of who the audience is.
See, this question relates to that, since we're talking a little bit about plain language. How do I strike the balance when writing a technical document between making sure it's easy to read, but making sure it's still 100% accurate? Is that possible even? Corinna, where would you go with that?
I think 100% accurate is always going to be difficult to prove. You can never foresee how the person at the other end will take it in. If they're trying to read something complex on their phone while they're running for the bus, then they are not necessarily going to take in the same message that you labored over at your end. So we would always recommend doing your utmost to combine clarity with accuracy. So making things readable does not mean oversimplifying. It means making sure the person who reads it can understand it the first time they read it. You don't have to sacrifice accuracy.
Are you saying that clarity and accuracy go hand in hand?
Well, the main thing is that you have to understand what you're writing before you can make it clear. So that would be part of the thing is, are you well enough acquainted with the subject matter to be able to make it clear? And if you can't make it clear, then perhaps you don't understand it as well as you thought you did.
Yeah.
Good point. Jacob, continue.
100%. 100%. If translating what you're trying to say into simpler terms is a challenge, then it might mean that you're not super familiar with the topic. But as far as accuracy versus clarity, I've found that in workshops I meet a lot of people who really want to use a certain term. They feel that this certain term must be used because this is exactly the term that the reader needs to know, which is fair enough. Give a simple definition if people need to know that term. But I found that often people who feel they're writing about a technical topic, they, in their quest to try and be exactly precise, they're being totally unclear and no one actually understands what's going on. So really thinking about how much detail does this person actually need to know to understand the overall concept, and really thinking about who your readers are. Because sometimes we feel, if we're the writers, if we're the ones giving the message, we feel that our readers need all the detail all the time. They really don't.
Lovely. And one of my key learnings about plain language is that often we're replacing words that we think are clear and precise, and they're not. They're just kind of businessy and vague, and then those simple words are sometimes the precise words that we need for the accuracy as well, which is cool. Okay, well, time for one last question before we start to wrap up. This comes from Anna Wilson-Colvin. Kia ora, Anna. I think Corinna's going to nail this one. How do you feel about frequently asked questions being used when it comes to difficult messages? Corinna, take it away.
Frequently asked questions tends to be a information dump of questions you have guessed people will ask frequently. To me, unless you have actually done a lot of user testing, research, surveys, and collected frequently asked questions, you don't know what questions people have. So I don't think they are a good idea. I would rather be asking people, giving them the opportunity to ask questions if they don't understand, always giving people somewhere they can go to ask for more. I wouldn't recommend overwhelming people with information, but it has honestly never been easier to add links, appendices, glossaries, hover glossaries to a document as it is now. So I think the opportunities to find out more should always be given. But that doesn't mean that you have to try to cover every question that somebody might answer. I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever gone to an FAQ page and actually found my question there.
That's great. And Jacob, if we've, say, let's say we've already got an FAQ page and it's dealing with some of those difficult questions, is there anything we can do with those pages so that the readers can find those answers a little bit?
Yeah, so I guess first of all, I'm not sure I fully understand the original question, but as far as FAQs go, if you've got a page dedicated to questions that people are constantly asking you, that's a strong sign that's information that should have been in the original place where they were getting the information. So if you've had to go through and collect, here are all the things that we didn't talk about that you wanted to know, that's relevant stuff that should be in the main body of what you're talking about.
Nice. And you could also try actually answering the questions in the headings rather than using the question. So if the reader's got the question in their mind, they see the answer on the page straight away. It'll also be a nice little handy one. Alrighty, we're almost out of time. I'd like to give you a chance to make your last stand, deliver your last word of this session. And thanks so much for your questions, for everyone that's dropped them in, being able to answer most of them. Corinna, what's your last word? What would you like to leave our audience with today?
Yeah, I want to go back to the concept of safety because that was quite a new one for me to think about. So the idea is trying to create a safe environment for conveying difficult messages. People feel unsafe when something important to them feels threatened. So when we go into difficult discussions, we quite often go in with this track of, I must do this, I must break the bad news, and I must make sure they understand it and get out of there. Whereas if we go in there watching for cues from the other person, if they are starting to withdraw, get defensive, go on the attack, say you're being unrealistic, then stop and think about how you can make it safe again, particularly by clarifying what you're not trying to do and what you are trying to do.
That's great. When we're not feeling safe, we aren't taking anything in. That's great. And Jacob, your closing word?
I'm going to take a leap and say that what makes some of the things that we need to say hard is because we find it uncomfortable to say the things that need to be said. So breathe and accept that the conversation that you need to have might just be hard. We can't always make an uncomfortable situation totally comfortable because we want it to be. Just accept that it will be difficult, breathe, and go from there. Don't try and hide the hard thing you need to say. Don't try and postpone or procrastinate the conversation. Have the conversation as it needs to be had and breathe through it. It'll be okay.
Thanks, Jacob. Yeah, you're right. It's part of doing this well is really owning the uncomfortable feeling that you're going to have delivering this. And if you do that, then you're halfway there, I reckon.
Mm.
Thanks again. Thanks so much for being with us today. You've been viewing, and Corinna and Jacob for joining us and sharing a few pearls of your wisdom. We'll see you again, hopefully very soon, either maybe at one of our workshops or again at our next Q&A. You can check out rightgroup.io for some of our free resources. And I've got a great blog there. We'll connect you to some of this. We'll be in touch. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Lovely to see you.
Awesome.
Happy day.
See ya.